Obligations with subtopic nature and effect of obligations, and this is already the part 2. We're done discussing in part 1 the obligation to give, and that is your real obligation. So recall what are the rights of the creditor as well as the obligations of the debtor if the thing involved is determinate or indeterminate. Also, as to the fruits, what is the nature of the right of the creditor before delivery and after delivery. So in this video, what we're going to discuss is obligation to do and the obligation not to do, and that is your personal obligation. Obligation to do, and that is your positive personal obligation. So what are the rights of the creditor? But before we proceed, please remember that the debtor cannot be compelled to do something against his will. Bawal yan because that would amount to involuntary servitude. So in that case, what happens to the creditor? What are his rights? Masyadong maganda yung batas. Sabi ng batas, if the debtor does not want to perform or fails to perform, creditor, you have the right to have the obligation performed or executed at the expense of the debtor. Basis is Article 1167, first paragraph. If a person obliged to do something fails to do it, the same shall be executed at his cost. But remember that if the personal and special qualification of the debtor is the principal motive for the establishment of the obligation, then the creditor cannot avail of this right. Example, you had an agreement with an artista, si Kuya Will, na he will host your Christmas party. You like Kuya Will because he is funny, he is famous. But later on, Kuya Will said, no, I don't want to do it for no reason at all. Can you ask another person to perform or execute the obligation of Kuya Will, and Kuya Will pay or will shoulder the expenses? Hindi pwede. What you can do there is only to demand damages from Kuya Will by reason of the breach. This is also another right of the creditor, and your basis for this is your Article 1170. Those who contravene the tenor of their obligations are liable for damages. What if the debtor performed naman his obligation but it contravened the tenor? What are the rights of the creditor? He can have, again, the creditor can have the obligation performed or executed at the expense of the debtor. Basis is Article 1167. Second, he can ask that what has been poorly done be undone. Your basis is Article 1167, second paragraph. Sabi dyan, furthermore, it may be decreed that what has been poorly done be undone. And lastly, the creditor can recover damages because of the breach. Basis is Article 1170. For application, let's take a look at this 1981 bar exam problem. There are 3 personalities involved: O, owner; B, builder; and A, architect. Owner contracted with builder to build a building designed by A. Architect A was paid a fee to supervise the construction and execution of his design. When completed, the owner accepted the work and occupied the building, but within 1 year, it collapsed in an earthquake that destroyed only the building and not the surrounding buildings. Construction was faulty. The building cost 3 million, but the reconstruction cost would reach 10 million. Question: could owner demand reconstruction of the building, and on what ground? Answer: yes. Basis is Article 1167. Pag may ganitong problem, guys, ang atake is first determine the prestation, whether the prestation is an obligation to give, an obligation to do, or not to do. In this case, or in this problem, the prestation involved is an obligation to do on the part of the builder and on the part of the architect. Next, know whether the debtor failed to perform his obligation or he performed but it was in contravention to the tenor of the obligation. In this case, si builder and si architect, they performed naman their obligation, but it contravened the tenor. So what are the rights granted by law to the creditor in that case? The creditor has the right to ask that what has been poorly done be undone. Kaya lang yan, hindi mo yan maa-avail in this problem dahil nag-collapse na yung building. Wala nang i-aandan. Second, the creditor can have the obligation performed or executed at the expense of the debtor. So that is your reason, that is your basis why the owner could demand reconstruction of the building. This is also the answer of the UP Law Center. Just take a look. X delivered a PlayStation to Y for repair. Y did not finish the job. Finally, despite repeated reminders of X for Y to finish the job, Y returned the PlayStation with his job undone and where some parts were missing. Zay then, another person, repaired the PlayStation. Zay charged X 500 pesos for the repair and 300 pesos for the missing parts. The lower court, however, ruled that Y should pay only the amount of 300 pesos. Question: is Y liable also for the cost of the repair? Answer: yes. Basis is Article 1167. Ano ang sabi natin? Paano inaatake ang problem? First, you determine the prestation if the prestation is an obligation to do, obligation to give, or an obligation not to do. In this problem, the prestation involved is an obligation to do. Aside from determining the prestation, ano pa ang gagawin mong atake? Determine whether the debtor failed to perform his obligation or he performed his obligation but it contravenes the tenor. Ano ang nangyari dito? Si debtor or si Y did not perform his obligation at all. In that case, can you compel Y to perform? Answer: no. Bakit? Bawal because that would amount to involuntary servitude. Pero ano ang sabi ng batas? Masyadong maganda ang batas natin. Ang sabi niya, creditor, you have the right to have the obligation be performed or executed by another person. Yan nga ang ginawa dito ni X, pina-repair niya kay Z. Ano ang catch? Ano ang sinabi ng batas? Kung debtor, kung ayaw mong gawin yan, okay lang. Ipapagawa yan ni creditor sa ibang tao, pero ikaw ang magbayad. That is the reason why the amount of 500 pesos should be paid by Y. Another question is Y liable also for the amount of 300 pesos, the missing parts? Answer: yes. Because the debtor has the obligation to return the PlayStation in the same condition as when he received it. So this is your answer. 1983 bar exam problem number 10. A bound himself to deliver to B a TV set, a refrigerator, and to repair the piano of B. A did none of these things. Question: may the court compel A to deliver the TV set? Answer: yes. Basis is Article 1246. Paano aatakihin ang problem? First, you determine the prestation if it is an obligation to do, obligation to give, or an obligation not to do. In this case, the prestation here is an obligation to give. Pag obligation to give, paano ulit mag-iisip? Isipin kung the thing involved is determinate or specific or generic or indeterminate. Your TV set is an indeterminate or generic thing because it was designated merely by their class or genus. And what are now the rights of the creditor as well as the obligations of the debtor if the thing involved is generic? Sabi natin, the creditor can ask for the performance of the obligation. Therefore, this is your basis why the court can compel A to deliver the TV set. ano lang ang magiging problema or ano ang obligation ni debtor? The obligation of debtor is to deliver a thing which must be neither of superior nor inferior quality. So ito yung sinasabi nating substituted performance. What happens if A does not want to fulfill his obligation? Ano ngayon ang karapatan ni creditor? The creditor can ask that the obligation be complied with at the expense of the debtor. Next, may the court compel A to deliver the refrigerator. Determine again whether the refrigerator is an indeterminate thing or determinate thing. Here, the refrigerator is a specific or a determinate thing because there was a particular description. It was physically segregated from other refrigerators. So in that case, can you compel specific performance? Ano ang sabi natin? If it is an indeterminate thing, the right of the creditor is to compel specific performance. The obligation of the debtor is to perform the obligation specifically. That is your Article 1244. Sabi ng Article 1244, debtor, you cannot compel the creditor to receive a different one kahit yung binibigay mo is mas mahal pa. Third question, can the court compel A to repair the piano? Ano ang sinabi natin? No, because that is an obligation to do and the debtor cannot be compelled to perform against his will. Bawal yan because that would amount to involuntary servitude. Paano ulit mag-isip? If there is no performance or if there is a performance but it contravenes the tenor. So what are the rights of the creditor if there is no performance? The creditor can have the obligation performed or executed at the expense of the debtor. So this is also the answer of the UP Law Center. Pabasa na lang ha. Let's correlate our discussion to this article, Article 1266. The debtor in obligations to do shall also be released when the prestation becomes legally or physically impossible without the fault of the obligor. So, legal impassibility, example, if you have this artista, she has an obligation to perform in Cebu and then lockdown happens, and the government does not want to allow any travel, therefore the artista is released from his obligation. Physical impassibility, example, if you have a boxer, meron din siyang agreement na siya ay magjo-join sa isang contest in Thailand, but naputulan siya ng kamay, therefore it is already physically impossible for the boxer, then the boxer is released from his obligation. For application, let's take a look at this 2015 bar exam problem. X and Y are partners. Y provided the capital and the marketing while X is your portrait artist. They accepted payment from Kyla to do her portrait, but X passed away without being able to do it. Question, can Kyla demand that Y deliver the portrait she had paid for because she was dealing with a partnership and not with the artist? Answer, no. Basis, Article 1266. Ano ang sabi natin? First, determine the prestation. What is the prestation involved here? The prestation is an obligation to do. So, even if the partnership is involved, ang gagawa talaga is si X. But since there is now a physical impassibility because of the death of X, therefore, Y is released from the obligation. This is also the answer of the UP Law Center. Down to our last slide, and that is about obligation not to do or your negative personal obligations. Example, if you have an agreement with your kapitbahay, ang usapan nyo is hindi niya tataasan ang kanyang building because that will obstruct your light and view, and he failed to comply with his obligation or with your usapan, what are now your karapatan? First, you can have it undone at the expense of the obligor. Basis is Article 1168. When the obligation consists in not doing and the obligor does what has been forbidden him, it shall also be undone at his expense. Another karapatan is you can ask for damages. Basis Article 1170. Those who contravene the tenor of their obligations are liable for damages. So this is the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching and have a good day.